All right, so we've got some fascinating stuff to dive into today. You know those apps and websites we use every day? Well, someone has to make sure they actually work right. And that's where software testing comes in.
Absolutely. And the tools and techniques they use are constantly evolving.
You guys sent in some really interesting material about this, and today we're going to really break down how these tools work, especially, how some of the newer approaches are changing the whole game. You with me?
I am, yeah. It's really interesting to see this kind of evolution, especially this push towards, like you said, more proactive methods.
So let's start with one that the material calls a real foundation, Selenium. It's open source, and it's used for automating web testing across all these different browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, the whole bunch. Why is Selenium so important in this world?
Well, I think the key with Selenium is its flexibility. It's all code-driven, so you can really get in there and customize it. And because it's open source, anybody can use it, anybody can modify it. It's kind of become this bedrock, right? It's what a lot of other tools are based on.
So it's like a really adaptable engine for controlling what happens in the browser, but automatically, right?
Yeah, exactly. It lets you automate all those actions you would normally do manually.
The sources also point out that you need, coding skills to really use Selenium effectively. Is that a big obstacle for people?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. You've got to have some coding experience to really harness its power. But the flip side of that is because it's open source, there's this huge community around it. Tons of resources, forums, tutorials, people helping each other out. And of course, the fact that it's free is a pretty big draw. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got Selenium, this powerful but code-heavy option. Then the material introduces Test Complete, and this seems to try and bridge the gap a bit. It offers both script-based and codeless testing. So what's the big deal about that?
Test Complete's strength is making testing more accessible. Not everyone's a coder. So they have this really cool feature called record and playback, where you basically just use the application like you normally would, and Test Complete records all your actions. Then boom, you've got an automated test.
So you're saying I could just use the app and it builds a test out of that?
Pretty much, yeah. Makes it much easier for people who aren't, hardcore programmers to get into automation. Great for the simpler tests, too.
That's really neat. So it's more user-friendly, but I guess you can still get into the code if you need to for those more complex scenarios.
Absolutely. And another thing the material highlights is the dedicated customer support you get with Test Complete, which, with open source, you don't always have that safety net.
Right. Okay, so we've got the power of Selenium, the user-friendliness of Test Complete, and then the spotlight shifts to ZAPTEST, which, get this, introduces something called mock-up-based automation. What in the world is that?
Yeah, so ZAPTEST is all about this idea of shifting left. Basically, you start testing much earlier in the development process, even before the app is actually built. They do this using wireframes and images, those early designs.
Wait, you mean you're testing a design before there's even an app to test?
Exactly.
How does that even work?
Well, they've got some really clever features to make it happen. They use what they call AI-powered vision, which can visually recognize elements in those early mock-ups. Then there's the ZOE object engine, which helps the tests adapt as those designs inevitably change. And of course, later on, you can still test on different devices and platforms. The big advantage here is that you're finding potential problems way earlier in the game, saving everyone a lot of headaches down the road.
So you're catching problems in the blueprint, so to speak, instead of waiting until the whole building is up.
Yeah, it's much more efficient to fix a problem on paper than to have to tear down a wall later, right?
That's a really good analogy. So ZAPTEST is all about finding those issues early to accelerate the whole development process and make sure things are solid from the get-go.
Exactly. It's a really different way of thinking about software testing, being proactive rather than reactive.
It's amazing to see how these tools have evolved, from that kind of code-heavy automation to these more, user-friendly methods. And now this whole idea of testing before there's even a real app to test.
Yeah, there's a clear trend towards early intervention and prevention, which is pretty exciting.
So for everyone listening, understanding how these different tools work is crucial. It gives you insight into how developers ensure the software we all rely on is actually reliable, how they aim to provide a smooth experience for all of us.
And I think it raises an important question about the future of software testing. As these tools become even more sophisticated, how does the role of the human tester change?
That's a really great point. It's something to ponder, right? What will their role be in this rapidly evolving landscape? It's definitely something to think about. But hey, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and keep those questions coming.